Hello, welcome to our weekly live stream show. This is a show where we talk for about an hour about very interesting topics. Each week is a different topic connected to emotional intelligence and emotions, and how emotions really affect the way we live, the way we work, the teamwork that we can have with other people, our relationship, and how to get success in life. Today, I'm very excited because we have a really interesting topic about management, and next week is going to be also about leadership. So it's kind of connecting themes. So today we're going to really talk about how should management change given the circumstances. And we all know that a lot has changed in the last few months. And so we all need to adapt. And how does management need to adapt? And so I'm very excited about the conversation. We have two exciting guests today that I can't wait to hear from. And I want to introduce Joshua Freedman, our CEO and moderator for the day, and he'll take it from there.
Thank you, Tom. And I wonder about Tom's assertion that things have changed. Would you agree? Are we in a time of change? And please, those who are here live, tell us in the chat, what do you think is there really change happening, or is this just a disruption and we're going to go back to the way things were? And if you're watching later, please join us in the comments. Between the pandemic, Black Lives Matter uprisings, the uncertainty of the future, it seems like there's a lot of change in the air. And this brings us to a very big question. Are managers ready? And if all this change is happening, what do managers need to be better at? On today's broadcast, we're going to go deep into this question and consider how emotional intelligence might be part of the solution. We'll share some data from a survey that we've been doing on this topic and invite you to add your perspective. And we'll look at starting with this one question, which was, my organization's norms about teamwork and communication have to change. 75% of people said a strong yes to that. And so I'd like to bring in our panelists, Princess and Jeff, and start by asking you, what's one change you'd like to see in this? And introduce yourself as we jump in here.
I'm happy to start. I think one change I'd like to see coming out of this is bold, inclusive conversations in the workplace. I'm Princess Ayers-Stewart. I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion for REI. I'm also the owner and president of the Ayers-Stewart Group. We create opportunity, connect people, and cultivate inclusion through consulting, wellness, and hospitality. I spent the better part of 20 years in legal and corporate environments, working to end discrimination and promote fairness in employment through EEO compliance, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm happy to be here with all of you and excited for the discussion.
Thank you, Princess.
Well, that's great, Princess. I'm not as impressive with my resume as yours, but I am Jeff Kinsley. I do international learning development for FedEx here, Express. And right now I'm in Amsterdam. Prior to that, I was in Latin America with the Latin America branch of FedEx Express International, and have been with FedEx for about 29 years. I actually studied political science as an undergraduate and got a master's degree in that. So a lot of the topics we may talk about kind of on the fringes today have been my lifelong interest. And I guess if I could talk about a topic I'd like to see change, and it was recently brought up in one of our meetings, is I want to make sure every voice is heard. A lot of times in our business world, we tend to hear the person that maybe speaks the loudest or the most often, and we may not include the person who may have a very valued point, but they're just not as comfortable in the environment speaking up. So just creating an open environment and a freeness for everyone, but also as a leader and a manager, making sure you create that space that everybody can have an opportunity to share their opinions.
Thank you, Jeff. Both of you really have alluded to this idea of hearing people and getting the voices into the conversation. I want to just take a moment and get some voices from around the world into our conversation here. Jason says we're in the new normal. I don't know if I'm there yet, Jason, but we're working on it. Maybe it is a time of transformation. Maybe we're really in this cusp of something new. And Ella, thank you for joining us from Turkey. And I think that this point that emotions are there, they've been there, and somehow they've been way on the back burner. Welcome Creativity and Beyond from Dubai, and Ashad from Bahrain. Thank you. I think this is a really important point for me. And Princess, you and I talked about this a little bit. Like, here we are with all of this stuff that's visible to us about racism, about structures in our societies, about the way we've been working. And all these business leaders for years have said, we need to control people and we need to make sure we have people in the office so we can see their work, and like, welcome COVID. All of a sudden we can work from home. But is that just going to go away next week? What do you think, Princess?
I don't think so. I think we are at, I've been calling it the trifecta. That has led to what I experience as a perspective transformation. So there's things that we can't unsee. So this may be a little US centric, but as I think about the election in our country and that polarized nature, we also have the pandemic. And then we have this conversation around race that is confronting and overt in a way that it hasn't been. And it's everywhere. So between those three things, I think we are having a collective perspective transformation. There are things that have gone on in the past several months that we just can't unsee. And it's generating lots of emotions. People are sad, people are angry, people are fed up with things that are going on outside of work, so to speak. And I think it's reasonable to expect that spills over inside of work. There's some expectation that the companies, organizations that we're working for are really addressing those things. Safety is a top concern, and well-being is top of mind for folks. I also think that in this perspective transformation, it is a new normal. I think someone said on the chat about a new normal. I think it's created a new normal from us. I don't think that there's a going back or this is just a blip on a screen. I think there's a shift.
So I'd like to ask all of you who are here in the chat to share your perspective. Are we really in a time of change, or are we in a blip? Jeff, what are you noticing?
I hope we're in a time of change. I think it's very exciting. I think the business world is actually mimicking like the IT changes we have in the world. It's very quick. It's very agile. I was reading an article from Deloitte about they have a new term called dynamic stability. I think we're at that tipping point, whether we are or not. I think once we get back into the new normal, we'll see if it actually had traction. Old habits are hard to break, and really defined muscle memories of doing things for years and years and years. Even when you're in a problem time, you can adapt those. But, it's old habits. They do come back. And I think many things that are going on in the world right now will show you it's some of those habits we just, if we don't pay attention, if we don't make conscious choices, if we don't put the value in dedicating to the change, it can creep back on us. So I hope it's the new normal, but maybe I'm a bit skeptical. I don't know if that's a good place to be, but I do hope that we've gained traction and like Princess said, the trifecta, making that change real and sustainable. I think it's positive.
Jeff, I love that. I don't hear that you're skeptical. I hear cautious optimism. But I think we've all had a collective experience of acting our way into a new way of thinking. So the behavior has led the thinking as opposed to the thinking leading the behavior. So we're all doing things, however forced, that has us experiencing new possibilities and new ways of being. And I find when change occurs that way, where the behavior leads, it tends to be a little more lasting. So that gives me hope. And then it's a proof point. Like we can do this. We're doing something together. And and faring through it together in a way that I think will stick. I'm hopeful.
Well, I think one of the things that we often talk about in emotional intelligence work, and Jeff has talked about this many, many times, is the importance of pausing and getting out of that automatic reaction we have. The pause is a disruptor. And in some ways, I wonder if the great pause we've been in with the pandemic has actually made a space for us to have the conversations about race, to have the conversations about management. I want to come back to race in 1 second, and I want to just go to this, stick with this virtual life for a second. On our survey, we asked people about our managers will need to interact with teams in new and different ways. And 84% agreed with that. But only 25% said their managers had the skills to manage the virtualized environment we're in right now. So what makes this virtualized environment so much more difficult for management? Jeff,
I'll jump in. Yeah, I will. Thanks. One of the things I've seen in particular with my team is their reliance on a lot of, let's call it, nonverbal communications, especially in some of the jobs we have at FedEx. We do a lot of talking and sharing and directive type of leadership. And what I'm finding is in a virtual reality, you have to have more concise language. You have to get to the points. You have to test for understanding. And I think a lot of managers don't really know how to test for understanding unless they're standing there watching them, or if they're sitting at a desk where they can walk by. And it creates a new environment of extended trust. That was a lot of things you hear from people that when they're working on, how do I know they're working? Well, what does their work product tell you? And relying on work product instead of just time in a seat. So I see that as one of the big struggles today.
So that directive leadership requires, in some ways, a constant checking.
Absolutely.
To maintain control.
Well,
and I think this is going to come right back to our racism part of our conversation too, because I think there's a huge element of way we conceptualize power.
Yeah.
But before we go to that, Princess, what about for you in this virtualized workplace? What's hard for managers?
I think what's hard for managers is not only having this virtualized workplace, but I think there are some additional stressors that are happening as well. And so I think the ability to develop new habits and norms, there's a level of intentionality. If I'm describing it in a word, I would say intentionality. It forces you to be intentional in ways that maybe you're not either practiced at or experienced with. And that takes a lot of effort and energy. So it can be fatiguing. There's no work's not getting done in an organic way. There's no ambient learning. You're not running into people at the water cooler or passing each other, and you realize how many things get done with that face-to-face or that ancillary contact. If there's something that you need done or you want done, you've got to be really intentional. You're scheduling a meeting. Everything is requiring just more effort, and that can be fatiguing for managers and for.
So that both of you have, in some ways, talked about shifting from a kind of unconscious way that maybe we just kind of get work done without maybe realizing, to being more intentional, but also of a more shared picture of what needs to get done.
Josh, you and I went through some personal journeys back in the early 2000s when we were talking about how do we get to there. And one of the things in your early teachings with the first groups I was in is getting out of that autopilot. You show up to work, you're on autopilot, you're just doing because that's what you do every day. And I think Princess tonight, what she's saying is now you just can't live in that autopilot because it's so different. It's so vastly different. And the lack of the ambient relationships, really, you have to create that conscious thought of doing things different and in their interacting differently. So, I mean, that was one of the greatest gifts I got back from the emotional intelligence learning was that, pull out of the autopilot, be in the moment, taking that moment of pause to really help you make better choices.
Yeah, I think also too, to piggyback on that, I think it's important to build trust, and to be honest, and to in some ways model vulnerability. And that may or may not be a space where managers are skilled or comfortable, but it's definitely needed because there's so much change. And as we're building new normals and new habits and routines, as a manager, you may not know all the answers, and you may not have as clear direction as you're used to, and being okay with sharing that and giving people and holding the space for people to be vulnerable. I think there's a different caretaking that is needing to happen in this virtual space, in terms of really sensing how people are feeling and doing and ensuring that their needs are met, and that they have a space to express their needs. And all of that is just new habits and norms in a virtual space that you just don't, that we may not be used to.
I think we've seen this for years, but somehow it's really amplified right now. And I think in the pandemic, there's a lot of things amplified. And certainly one of those is the deep inequities that we're seeing in the world and in the United States. In the survey, we asked people if their managers have the skills to be effective at building and leading a diverse workforce. And only 23% said yes. And I'd like to go to everybody who's here on chat. Does that shock you? Would you have said more or less? 23%, and yet we live in this globalized world, and in the US, we have a demographic that's shifted dramatically in my lifetime, and yet somehow racism has not changed. So what will it take for managers? What is the thing managers really need to bring forward to start to change this system? Who wants to start? It's a nice, easy question.
Yeah. Thanks for that softball out there, Josh. I'll kick it off. Just one of the things I've taken is leading from the top. I can tell you at FedEx, diversity and inclusiveness has always been a part of who we are. We have a people strategy. It's central to our foundations. But being in Europe, I've kind of been watching this like it's a video game for me. But the greatest thing that I've seen in our company's response is the moment we started having the struggles and the issues, our CEO, our chairman, our leadership was already out there. That they were having video conferences. They were sending messages to the employees. They were already sending messages to the managers of, we can and we will do better. And that's the messaging that we want to have is, you know what? We always have an opportunity to do better. And I'm very proud of our leadership getting out there in making that their foundation of, you know what? We're going to accept everything that we have. We're not going to back away from it. And we're going to make tomorrow better. And I was very proud of our leadership for doing that. It sent a strong message to our management team.
Princess, for you have been really focused on leading a diverse team and diverse workforce yourself. And I'm curious, for you as a Black woman, what have you grappled with about being a senior leader in a diverse team?
Oh, let's see. In these times, I guess the grapple is really it's a few folds. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Jeff said, and I'll circle back to that. I think, Jeff, you're right, and I agree with you where things are coming messaging from the top and leadership really stepping into this space and setting a tone. I think more than setting a tone, we have to, in addition to setting a tone, I think there are some things that we have to practice and feedback that we, skills and capabilities that we have to practice and build for leaders. There's a model called conscious inclusion. And so there's this concept that if we are being intentionally inclusive, there's a high likelihood we might be unintentionally exclusive. And these aren't things that it's an extra skill set of, oh, I have to do these extra things. It's things that I think part and parcel to leadership, demonstrate empathy, communicate authentically, embrace differences, manage privilege, and act courageously. So there are some things that I think as we start to move into this new normal, and as we start to develop skills and behaviors and expectations for managers, that we can help create. I'm finding what people are grappling with is a strong desire to want to do better or be different, but also paralyzed with fear that they're going to say or do the wrong thing. And so in that space, you're just stuck. You're motivated to change and to do, but terrified to move. And I think that's going to be something that we need to address. How do we move through that fear? And how do we help people move through that fear to have those bold, inclusive conversations that I think at this point we have to have in the workplace now?
I want to just bring in a couple comments that I think play into this. Thank you, Bob, for this comment. That so much of our workplace thinking is about things and resources and tasks, and we even call people resources, right? There's a dehumanization in a workplace. And I think that this mechanistic view of human beings creates a context where it's incredibly difficult to have bold, inclusive conversations. And really empathy, if what you're dealing with is widgets, empathy is kind of irrelevant. Now, Jeff, I know that in your company, you have grappled with this. You have a concept of people-first leadership, and yet you're a company that's very focused on task. So how do you conceptualize that balance between task and being people first? And you're muted, so click unmute before you talk.
Thanks. Yeah, that was one of our struggles, and one of the reasons why I came to work with your company when I did. It's because we realized that empathetic listening really has to be at the core of what we're doing. When you're moving packages, it can be very transactional. I understand that. It's what we do. It's our processes. It's what gives us our competitive edge. But we want to make sure that we're listening to our employees and we're hearing them. One of the biggest messages we got through this pandemic was, we have to be safe. We have to provide materials. We have to be out there front. You can't put the employees in difficult situations. And that was our first thought in every meeting. It was, are the employees safe? Is everyone safe? Have we created an environment for safety? Even when it's widgets, Josh, the things we want to do is engage our employees differently. A personal lesson for me, and kind of if I can share a personal story. One time when I was a manager, I was an operations manager, the frontline responsible for moving packages. And I had an employee call in and they needed a sick day. And I asked why, and they said, well, their dog had died. In my mind, that wasn't what you take a sick day for. It just wasn't where I landed. And my response was, well, you need to come into work. That's just not what a sick day is for. And, I didn't listen empathetically. I didn't understand the situation that employee was in and the value that they had put in with that pet. It may sound very simple, but it was very critical to this person. And the whole point of the story was I couldn't hear what was important to that person. It wasn't delivering packages. It wasn't processes. It was having someone empathetically listen that they had lost something in their life that was very special. They were very upset about it. And even though it wasn't where my space was, I wasn't empathetically listening to understand what they needed in order to get through this situation. And I think at FedEx, that's a real big thing that we try to instill in our leaders is be that empathetic listener, make that value. Anytime you have that touch point where it's not transactional, don't miss that moment. And, you know, my lesson learned from going through the emotional intelligence training is that pause of realizing, hey, I'm not in this space right now, but they are, and I need to find that empathetic moment and give them what they need to help them get through these difficult times. So I guess that my personal sharing there would hopefully be of value to help unexplain a very transactional situation.
Jeff, I love your answer in the sense that what you find when people find themselves in a fragile state or in a defensive state around some of these challenging topics, the first thing that you lose is your ability to listen and show empathy to others. And so that's a really great reminder that, again, that intentionality to kind of look for that. Where you're uncomfortable, particularly around conversations about race or difference, it's just the place we go. We lose our ability to listen and to show empathy because we're so into how we feel in that moment. You talked a lot about safety also in terms of safety being first. And I think there's a strong need now to really focus on, we've heard it in the literature, we've read about it, this idea of psychological safety and how to create that. And I think now more than ever, in addition to physical safety being heightened in the wake of the pandemic, I think there is definitely a need to for heightened focus and attention on creating psychological safety in our workplaces, in our virtual places.
When Jeff was talking about safety at the beginning of the pandemic, that's exactly what was going through my head, Princess, was I wish we could have that same level of attention to emotional safety. Mm-hmm. Princess, you and I talked a couple weeks ago, and I had just come out of a challenging conversation about race, and we talked about this piece of being scared. Like, I don't know what to do differently. I know I need to do things differently. I don't want to screw it up. It feels really important to me. And on the one hand, I hear this message like, yeah, it's time to step up. And on the other hand, I just know this is such a volatile situation for so many people. And even sending out an email with Black Lives Matter in it felt scary to me, you know? And so how do I find a way forward when I know that it's so volatile?
I think there's a couple of things that I think about, and I'll do this by way of story, because I have a tendency, and I think many of us do, to translate emotions into thoughts where we may be more comfortable manipulating them. So we want to intellectualize some of these feelings to bypass the discomfort of the feeling. And what I would suggest is that you give yourself permission to feel fully. And you're going to make mistakes. We're human. Like, we're going to make mistakes. And I think you have to really acknowledge the fear and feel the fear. I call it walking through the narrow gate. We all have to walk through the narrow gate. This isn't fearful for just one group. So as a Black woman, I'm scared too. I don't know, there's uncertainty in the future. This conversation is very confronting and it's very specific. It's Black and it's white. It's forcing us to look at things in a new way that has been around us for a very long time. And it feels really big and really heavy. I think it starts with a conversation. I think it starts with some self-reflection and some self-awareness. And starting with you, we all want to jump to walking in someone else's shoes and what would it feel like, and I can't imagine. And I think some of it is sitting with ourselves and sitting with our fear and working through it. We've got to work through the fear, and we have to give each other grace. We are all in this together in this new way, and we've got to hold the space for grace and for mistakes and for growth.
I think that really speaks to Jeff's earlier point of seeing ourselves as learners. And I think very often in our workplaces where our self-expectation becomes, I'll just speak for myself. My self-expectation becomes, I should know this. I'm the CEO. I'm the senior, whatever. Like people are looking to me for answers. And that's another power dynamic of seniority means that you know the answer.
Yeah, we don't know. And I said that earlier, that it's important to know that in this changing environment, to be honest and to be vulnerable about not knowing and giving yourself permission to not have all the answers. I think in leadership, you think you're supposed to. And this is not the case in this particular moment because this is new and unfolding newly for us all.
You know, just listening to you talk about this and trying to tune into what I'm feeling. And you mentioned I'm so used to being up here, right? And I see Bob Ingram is on the chat, and Bob used to work for the U.S. Army and doing leadership training of civilians. And Bob, you could put it in the chat the exact right way, but it's something like leadership as a journey of 18 inches, right? from here to here. And that's
a good one.
That's a long journey.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, how about for you in this? I mean, it must be a little odd for you being in Europe right now. You've worked in a very diverse company and a company that's really dedicated to, well, it's been a major focus for your company for a long time to change the dynamics of race. And I know you've worked really hard at growing managers of color and growing Black people and supporting a really significant contingent of the company who are Black. And yet in senior leadership, I think there's now one Black CEO at FedEx, which is a huge step forward. And there's a lot more to do. So what are you feeling right now, being so far away from this?
I guess what I'm feeling now is, you know, the realization of the struggles that are in the United States. It's, for me, in my lifetime, it's always been a Black-white struggle. I just think at the time, you know, I'm at an age where this was my life. You know, I'm almost 60 years old, and my childhood and my adulthood, it's just been this struggle. And what I've learned here in taking over my assignment here is it struggles everywhere. You know, one of my areas that I used to lead, the struggle was religious. You know, whether you were a Muslim or a Christian, many of the same struggles, many of the same biases. It wasn't necessarily on color, but it was on something that separates us, that keeps us apart. And I guess that was what I've gained most from this is, how do we have those conversations and really honestly talk about what keeps us apart, what makes us different? And, you know, and no matter what your challenge is, whether you live in Amsterdam or you live in Miami, Florida, or you live in, you know, Durham, North Carolina, or Dallas, Texas, or Dubai, wherever, it's a separation. There is a difference. There is that moment of discomfort that everybody feels. And I guess what I'm trying to do in my life, hopefully in the twilight of it, is to find some comfort in the discomfort and actually, lean into those topics when they are difficult, and hoping that I'm leaning in with a group and having these conversations that will give me the empathetic listening and realize my struggles and respect me that I'm willing to talk about it, and not necessarily realizing I have the right words for saying everything. And that's the most important for me, is listening to all of their saying, where they're, not only, if you drop down a little bit lower than just your mind, but hearing what's coming through in their hearts and their thoughts, that all inclusive is for me where I would like to see everybody get to. I think it's very aspirational, but that's where we need to be, and that's where I hope we get to. But I do realize historically it's been a huge struggle, and the separation has remained there probably far too long.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's an opportunity for us through this to all become more conscious of our worldview. I think we have an opportunity to unlearn devaluations. We have this idea that somehow different means less than. And if we can somehow shift away from that, I think it would make a difference. And if we can accept differences as valuable, understanding that equal does not mean the same. So I think if we can move towards challenging those assumptions of around difference and having meaningful conversations about them, we could get towards that aspiration.
I think there's a compounding effect of the systems that we're in. And again, coming back to power and power over. And one of the things I hear, Jeff and I worked on a program for new managers, and was really incredibly successful. But one of the things that we heard people saying is, well, I'm supposed to be like this because that's what managers do, right? And managers are the boss, and managers have power over. And I just wonder, Princess, you're working in an organization that has a very, at least on paper, and I've been a member for a really long time, so I hope it's not just on paper, but on paper, has a different idea of what power is supposed to look like. Can you share a little bit about how that's changing your work as leading diversity and inclusion?
Absolutely. I love what you said. You started out talking about these structures that compound things. And so what's interesting for the organization that I work for is that it's a co-op. So it's a different model. And so when we think about being a member of something or joining something, 70% of our profits go back to employees and to members and to philanthropic endeavors. And so there's just a different expectation, I think, and a different accountability in that structure that lends itself well to having different conversations around power. Now, it's not perfect. There's things like hierarchy and all of that comes into play, I think, in any sort of structured organization. But there is a permission that I think is granted given the structure that we have and given the history that we have. We have a very activist culture. And so there is this idea that we are here to make a difference and to make the world a better place and to do hard things. From a power perspective, when we're thinking about our platform in terms of the outdoors and having that be a place for all, that gives us an incredible aspiration. And we have the structure, I guess, and the freedom and the permission to really wholeheartedly pursue that aspiration and to bring our 19 million members along with us, which is quite a force to mobilize. This power conversation, though, and I'm glad you brought it up, Josh, because we talk a lot about equity, but we don't talk expressly about the power word and the shift. And I think some of the challenge that we may face and where I may share some of your skepticism, Jeff, is around this notion that power doesn't concede itself. Power has to be generally taken in some way. And so we have all of these notions around that. And so if we're going to shift power and if we're going to have an equitable society, how do we start to talk about how we shift power in a way that is effective and human, if that makes any sense? How do we transform this conversation around power? Because we have so many, we're knotted up about it. I think we're just as knotted up about the word power and how we use it and wield it as we are about race. And so I see them going hand in hand.
Power does not concede itself. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. That is a notion. I'm not saying I believe that, but I think there is an experience of that.
It's nice to have power.
Yeah,
It's
right?
comfortable. And
well, Josh, I loved your analogy around a pie. It's like somehow, we're going to, if you give up some of your power, you're going to lose something, or there's this idea that there's just not enough.
Yeah.
And there's only so much, and me giving up something, or me giving something, or you having more power means something is being taken away from me.
I think this really gets to the heart of rethinking management. In one of our books, we talk about, in the Vital Organization, we talk about the idea that we're in a transition of management. And one of the transitions, for example, is from demanding trust to earning trust. And the idea of saying, I'm the boss, you have to trust me. Like, you come work here, you do what we tell you. And that's a very command and control oriented view of trust, and doesn't work. So it doesn't work today. So if we're going to earn trust, maybe we could say the same thing about, I don't know, earning power. I feel like in the 6 seconds model, we talk about know yourself, choose yourself, give yourself. It's very much directed at you showing up differently. And somehow in that, if I really choose myself, I'm actually creating space for somebody else. And that's, I think, power doesn't concede itself, but we can do that work to say, I don't think it's empowering others, really. I think it's making space.
Exactly. And that is my philosophy. I don't know that you can empower another person, but you can create a hold of space for people to be empowered. And I think that's our responsibility as leaders, honestly, is to create and hold that space. Absolutely. Jeff, you look like you were about to say something.
No, I was just kind of going through the whole 6 seconds model and just thinking about, one of the big components there is consequential thinking. Do you think about something before you do it? Do you think about creating a power vacuum or a power transference, or are you just doing it? One of the biggest things that we shifted to the 6 seconds model. At the same time coming out, there were a lot of 360 evaluations coming out, which was you evaluating yourself, your manager evaluating you, and then your subordinates evaluating you, maybe some peer-to-peer. We intentionally chose a 6 seconds model because it was the only model where you evaluated yourself. So in all the other models, you could say, oh, that group really didn't understand me. They really didn't like me, or, my boss really isn't engaged. He's got so many other people, or, my peers, there's a bunch of that are more senior, or some are don't understand me. But when you took the 6 seconds model, it was your evaluation about how you saw things, your perspective. Did you view things with rose-colored glasses? How did you score yourself on consequential thinking? So when we did the coaching and we talked about trying to stay on point of all those issues, it was, no, this is you evaluating yourself. This is you seeing where you are in all of these situations. These are your choices. And for me, it was a great coaching experience because the person couldn't walk away from it. They may choose not to hear it. They may choose not to unpack it, on board it, but it was their thoughts around their beliefs and things they needed to look into across the continuum of knowing yourself, choosing yourself, giving yourself, all of those areas. It showed you how you could really improve or choose to take a different way if you wanted. And that was one of the reasons why we went with that in that new manager class, Josh, is because it was so on point with what they needed. They couldn't walk away from themselves.
And I think that's powerful that you created the space and took the time in the workplace for people to do that self-examination and to do that exploration and to make it okay and to create that expectation. That's that holding that space, creating and holding that space for people to be empowered. And we just oftentimes don't take that time or feel like we have that time or don't think it's appropriate to show up or do that work at work.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story about, we did a case study about this project with FedEx, and we got comments from a lot of the participants in the program. And then we sent the case to senior management for approval to allow us to publish it. And I was really worried because there were all these comments about, this project saved my marriage, learning about EQ. I thought I might have to stop flying because I was struggling too much with my emotions. There were really personal anecdotes. And the managers didn't say, they did increase their efficiency and we had data to show that, but what they talked about was this personal stuff. And I was really worried that the senior management would say, oh no, we don't want to publish this case. And what they said was the opposite. They said, this really shows our values.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's some of the greatest success stories we had out of all that curriculum was we had managers that realized, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want what I'm doing. And that's very powerful. It's very scary. But I can tell you, for me, one of the greatest takeaways was for my marriage in how my wife and I interact. To this day, we still use it. And I still look at that and think, what a gift. It was an absolute gift in my life. And, I'm sorry if I'm getting a bit personal here, but it was exactly what I needed at exactly the right time, because I was a very good transactional leader. Very good transactional. Let me step back from that. I was a very good transactional manager. I think one of the participants talked about the difference between managing and leading. I don't know that I was a good leader at all. I think what this did was make me question myself and get into a space was, are you just dependent on what you're good at and you're stepping away from what you need to work on? Because I believe so many people they take their strengths and they overuse it so much, it becomes a weakness. And I know I did. I could drill down the numbers and I can make efficiencies, but I couldn't connect. I couldn't empathetically listen across the spectrum of my life, not just at work. So this is why it was just such a gift for me and why I'm such a big fan of this wonderful experience I had in my life. So once again, sorry, that's the real personal soapbox, but it did make a difference in my life.
Well,
And
Princess says we need to have bold.
When I have a chance to share that story, I always do.
Princess says we need to have bold and inclusive conversations. And I think if we can include our whole selves in these conversations, we're probably going to get a lot further. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
There were some comments about power that I want to come back to. Let me see in the chat here. Again, thank you, Bob. This is a really interesting definition of power. And then Sue, authority and power. There's this word enforce in here. I'm wondering for you, all of you in the chat, when you think about power, what is your power? And do you feel powerful? One of the things that really surprised me, that I really grapple with, was I was in a course a couple of years ago, and somebody said to me, "Oh, it's hard for me to do." I was observing. Somebody said, "It's hard for me to be the facilitator when you're in the room, Josh." And I said, "Well, why?" They're like, "Well, because you're the CEO and you're Josh Freedman." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm like, I look in the mirror and I don't see myself as different than, I'm a little grayer." But I don't see myself as somebody powerful. And in fact, to be honest, there are a lot of days where I wake up and I feel this sense of like a really powerlessness. I want to engage and influence the world and support a different kind of conversation, and it seems insane and impossible and way too big for any small group of us. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but it seems like a hard thing to then say, okay, well, maybe you need to give up some power. I'm like, but I don't feel like I have it.
It is a hard thing because I don't feel powerful, but I can tell you certain rooms I walk in with my title, there's a hierarchy, whether I established it or not. I have people call me Mr. Kinsley, and I start turning around looking for my father.
Me too.
It's just not that. And I don't know if internally we all see ourselves as that younger version of when we see our struggles, because we know our struggles, and maybe because we know those and others can't see those. I feel the same way, Josh, is that I wake up and wonder how I'm going to get the foot on the floor. And, and that's not a powerful person, but, I think a great leader always feels that way, I believe, is I can do more. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a wonderful way to be. I hope you always feel like you can do more and you have a challenge. That, Princess, I hope you do also, is because I think that's what we keep moving in the right direction when we feel that way, because it's very valuable.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
interrupting you. I'm thinking about power in two ways, and I had a transformational discussion or experience with power with my priest. I'm a cradle Catholic, and my I remarried 3 years ago, and my husband is Protestant, and so we're in a conversation with my priest. Father Jack knew me and had, I guess, a paternal sensibility for me. I moved to Seattle from Chicago as I had a household mom, and my son went to grammar school at the parish where we worshipped. And so we're sitting in sort of the premarital counseling meeting, and Father Jack asked my husband in a very paternal way, why do you want to marry Princess? And so my husband responds all the reasons why he wants to marry me. And then he gives this great story that talks about when he's talking to new priests, he asks them why they want to become a priest. And, they respond with all the things, I want to help people I believe in the message of, and all the things that you think you should say as to why you're becoming a priest. And he infers, he says, and you like power. And you want power. So they're saying why they want, and you want power, and you like power. And then they sort of kind of recoil, like, no, it's not about power. I just want to help people. And he's like, becoming a priest gives you power. And if you don't want that power, you can't be responsible for that power. And there's a high likelihood that you'll misuse it or abuse it, or just not take responsibility for it. And so I think some of it is presencing yourself. From that conversation, I learned this idea of presencing yourself to power. So Jocelyn, you gave the example of sort of not even being present to your power, or knowing that your title, I think Jeff, you mentioned this, comes with power. Whether you want it or not, there's these structures that we've inherited or that we fall into that gives us power. And so for me, I go back to as a little girl, one of the things that I was taught is that your words have power, and words have power. So I think about power as the velocity at which my word becomes realized, and it makes me really responsible for my word. So how can we present ourselves to our power so that we can be responsible for it? And for me personally, in terms of my personal power, I'm just really mindful of my word, how I wield it, and and how I use it to bring things into the world or bring things into existence.
Wow. Do you feel powerful? You're a senior leader and you're pretty articulate and you see of that positional authority. Do you feel powerful?
Oh my gosh. Do I feel powerful? I feel a high sense of responsibility to create and hold a space for others to be empowered. Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about what leadership means to me now in this phase of my life. Jeff, you alluded to being an old man. I don't think either of us is quite there yet. I don't think either of us quite gets twilight. Twilight years.
I thought that was an interesting word for us. That was like twilight years. Whoa.
But gray hair would be okay. But I've been thinking a lot about what leadership means to me now. And it's less and less about doing. And more about being. And I feel like that part of who I want to be as a leader is a space holder.
Is it different than who you want to be as a person? Are those sort of distinct for you? Or does that all kind of gel together?
I think I want to be I think it goes together. I want to be a leader. I want to be, but I don't want to be a leader over.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking, it really is a lot about power and about what kind of power am I going to choose? And the power over is much more comfortable and much more normal.
I'm thinking I'm going to go to one of the comments. I was flipping through those a moment ago, and there's one from Nathaniel, and I'm going to adopt this comment. It's much better than I said it. There's a lot of power in taking the stance of powerless. Give the space for others to act. It is inclusive. That's a great statement. That covers. I get to choose that one now. That's going to be my position. It's so good, but no, that's point on right there.
Thank you for noticing that. Thank you, Nathaniel. Well, I don't know how this happened, folks, but we're out of time. I feel like we just got it started. So what's your final word for today? We have people on the call from, as you saw, from all over the world, the live stream, and people will be watching this all over the world thinking about how do we show up in this moment as leaders, as managers. One tip, one wish.
Please go ahead.
I'm going to start with, I'm going to end with where I started. Bold and inclusive conversations. There's so much that happens in a conversation. And that's what I want to see more of in the world.
Yeah, much along those same lines, I would choose two words: is transparency and hope. I think if I go with those two things, it would be a wonderful day.
I think my takeaway is really, Jeff, you said it before, getting off autopilot. We are in a new context. And it's a very stressful time right now. And I know when we're stressed, we have a natural tendency to go back to what was comfortable and to go into protection. And that's not what we're called to do right now. We're called to step forward into those bold conversations, those bold and inclusive conversations, to step forward with more transparency. And all of those are switching off the autopilot, even though it's scary.
We get to do it afraid.
We get to do it afraid.
Yep.
I want a t-shirt.
That'd be a good t-shirt, baby.
I tell myself that every day. Every day. It's like, you're scared. I have to acknowledge my feelings. I'm afraid. I'm scared, and I get to do it afraid.
Yeah.
I think I shared this on one of our other live streams, but on my phone case, I bought a transparent case so I could put a message to myself on there. And this
Awesome.
one, I think I might just add, I get to do it afraid right there.
Yeah, fear is real. We coexist with it every day as humans, and we still got to keep moving.
And it's valuable. I know it's hard, but fear is actually tells us that something I care about is at risk. And I'm really grateful to you for both joining us today and getting into some of the things we really care about.
Thank you for this opportunity. This is
Absolutely.
really wonderful.
It has been enlightening. So thank you, Princess. Thank you for sharing this with Josh and I. And Josh, thank you again for having me. It's been a great pleasure. Anytime I come up again, just let me know. I'm more than willing to assist.
Well, I want to just continue this conversation very soon. So let's do that.
Likewise.
Thank you both. And Tom, thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Tom.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jeff and Princess and Josh, for this awesome conversation. I found it very stimulating. I feel like I'm going to have a lot of energy to go back to work today and really feeling the urgency of these kinds of conversations in the corporate world. I think this is the important things that we need to talk about, because there is nothing more important than how do we handle power, how do we handle fear. I love that latest statement about how I get to do it afraid. Like, new things are scary. Like doing the introduction on this live stream was scary for me, but it's been a great pleasure. And I find it very stimulating. And I love the chat comments that we saw in the chat. And please, if you want to support us and want us to keep going with these live streams, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and comment and let us know what you liked about this live stream and what you would like us to cover on the next one. We do these things so that you can enjoy and find it useful, so let us know. And we hope to see you next week for the Vital Leadership panel, where we're going to share a lot of great insight about this research study that we did at the end of last year. It's going to be really interesting to see what came out of it. Bye.
If this was helpful, would you please comment, like, share, and subscribe? The Emotional Intelligence Network is your community to grow and practice EQ. At 6 seconds, that means being smarter with feelings. And we're here to provide practical, proven EQ tools so workplaces, schools, and people can thrive everywhere in the world. Be sure to visit 6seconds.org to find the complete suite of resources, assessments, and programs. Thank you for watching.